Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Potawatomi Casino Hotel Milwaukee, home to 24/7 excitement, dining, and an on-site hotel at 1721 West Canal Street. More information at potawatomi.com.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Joy Powers. Today we'll learn about the history of the Milwaukee Soldiers Home and how it's helped generations of veterans.
This is a building that is made with the very sort of like marrow of who we are. It's a beautiful Gothic tower built with Cream City brick made from clay from the Menominee Valley. I mean, it's very much of us.
Then we'll head to the Rare Books Room at Central Library to learn about one of their rarest items, a complete collection of Audubon prints.
It took from 1827 until 1838 to finish issuing this because it was like a subscription service. Instead of Netflix, you got just birds sent to your home every so often.
Plus, we'll talk to this year's artist-in-residence at Milwaukee's Betty Brinn Children's Museum. All of that is coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Joy Powers, and thank you so much for joining us. Looking west over the city of Milwaukee near the Brewers Stadium, you may have seen a Victorian turret rising above a thicket of trees. If you move closer, you'll find a grand home, surrounded by a complex of historic buildings, all created with a singular goal: helping America's veterans. It's the Milwaukee Soldiers Home, and since it was created in the mid-1800s, it's helped generations of veterans. A film from Milwaukee PBS explores that history and how it continues to help veterans today. Marianne Lazarski and Scotty Lee Myers are the producers of A Hallowed Home for Heroes. They joined me when the documentary came out to share more about the home.
So the Milwaukee Soldiers Home has become a pretty iconic part of the skyline, specifically near the Brewers Stadium. Why was the Soldiers Home first created?
Well, it was created actually by a group of women who were taking care of soldiers during the Civil War era in makeshift temporary storefronts. And just to kind of briefly tell you, they were set on trying to figure out a permanent place for the soldiers to come and rest and heal from their wounds and sicknesses. And so they're the ones who really were the founders of the Soldiers Home. And there was a fair that was involved, and they raised a ton of money, $110,000. And, back then that was a lot of money. And their business husbands decided to go to Washington and tell President Lincoln that he should build the first soldiers' home here in Milwaukee. And that was at the same time that the president had signed legislation to create a national system of soldiers' homes. But these women, they were smart women, and they were gung-ho about, hey, we're going to get this done. And so, that's kind of how it all started.
Yeah, the origin of the VA system as we know it today, we see that big building, the Clement J. Zablocki VA Medical Center on the south side of Milwaukee. That whole system, the story starts in Milwaukee with, as Marianne said, these founding women. And sometimes I think we get this impression when we hear about, the mid-19th century women creating this, but they weren't just sort of like having tea parties and raising money. These were like real political actors of that time with strong project management sense, with great business acumen. They got things done. And, this story also coincides with President Abraham Lincoln's last legislative act, one of his last legislative acts before he was assassinated. And essentially, he called on Congress in his second inaugural address to build a national system of homes to take care of veterans as they return from the battlegrounds.
Well, this comes around at a really interesting time, I think, both in our nation's history, but also kind of the history of the world. We're in a situation where, for the first time, soldiers are in larger numbers surviving their injuries. These are people who are not necessarily dying on the battlefield. They aren't dying in these battlefield-side hospitals, but they are able to come home. But their lives are forever changed by their time at war. What were the initial years of this space like as they're kind of figuring out what this system is going to be?
So there was a strong patriotic sense that we need to care for these men who are returning home from battle. And so the mass efforts that were undertaken, I mean, every sort of parish and town and corner of the city, there was organizing happening. People were doing, collections of money, collections of clothing, of food, of lint that would help with wounds. So in the beginning, it really was an incredible all-hands-on-deck effort. But it also these were men who were scarred and who had amputations and injuries from war. And sometimes they suffered. There's quite a bit of documentation about drinking and alcoholism on campus. So like any sort of population, there was, struggles as well.
Yeah, and, the founding women, their intent, I think, was to have the Soldiers Home for Wisconsin veterans. But what happened was it became a place for soldiers from across the country who, might come here for rest or to heal from whatever, wounds or whatever. And so, again, that was in line with what, President Abraham Lincoln wanted. But like Scotty said, patriotism was very strong. But even today, there are veterans from, the Iraq War, Afghanistan, those who would have otherwise been homeless at least have an option, if they qualify to be at Milwaukee Soldiers Home. So, and the future is important because sadly, there will probably be other wars. We always hope that there aren't. But there will always be a place for veterans who are in need of some place to live.
And the veterans who live in Old Main and on campus right now, they are really being provided by a couple agencies on campus with wraparound services, whether it's employment help, financial literacy, a connection to both mental and physical health. So those wraparound services exist today to veterans who are living at the Milwaukee Soldiers Home.
And that makes Milwaukee and Milwaukee Soldiers Home unique.
Yeah.
That everything is kind of right there for those veterans.
Well, and this is something that is, I was about to say new, but relatively new, in part because although the Soldiers Home is very old, things changed over the decades at the space itself. What has that evolution been like in the space? Because for a time it was closed.
Yeah, it was closed for nearly 30 years, and obviously a lot of deterioration happened. But one of the main project manager from the Alexander Company who oversaw the restoration of 6 buildings there, and they reopened in 2021. Their intent was to raise the money to restore these buildings because they knew it was really important. And they're hoping to do the same with 3 other buildings there on the campus, which is the theater, the chapel, and what's called the governor's mansion. So remember, Soldiers Home was like a village district in and of itself and had its own zip code, but it also had a governor, so to speak, who oversaw the district. And so those other 3 buildings hopefully will be restored very soon because the veterans would like that to happen. People in this community would like to see that happen. And the restoration that happened with the original 6 buildings is really impressive, especially with Old Main. When you look at the photographs and the images of the deterioration and then you see how it's been transformed, the veterans who live there they're in awe. As they told us, if you're a veteran dealing with some trauma or in crisis and you have no place to go, as they put it, this is a great deal. So we're fortunate to have this here in our own backyard.
And the existence of this place was called into question in the past as well. In 1915, 16, 1917, as Civil War veterans were sort of aging and dying and their numbers were dwindling at Old Main and on campus there, folks weren't really sure if there was a need for this place anymore. There was a city official who said, should we close this place down and just make it like a big park for the public? And then came World War I and things to follow. And then you had sort of a new generation of veterans moving into the home. 1989, fast forward a bit, that is when the VA officially put locks on the doors. Old Main was too old to tear down, but also too decrepit to let people live there anymore. And so it just sat there vacant. Paint was peeling from the walls. A New York Times article referred to it as Spanish moss almost. I mean, it was just a dire situation. And then the roof collapsed. And then when the roof collapsed, it really galvanized the community to come together and say, look, this is a jewel in our community with a ton of history. It's a beautiful, we need to preserve this place. And that's really when things kicked off. The Milwaukee Soldiers Home we all love to hate listicles, but it was named one of the 11 most endangered National Historic Landmarks in the country. And really a revitalization effort was put into place after that.
So as we look at the documentary itself, how do you explore this history? Because we're talking about a lot of time. What is it, 130 years?
There's
140?
there's a ton of history, and you can't cover every single little detail, but yet important detail. We tried to tell this story through a family, actually, who grew up there because their dad was a chaplain for the VA, and he was an Army colonel. And they walked us through the journey of the Soldiers Home by coming back and having them reflect on some of their memories. Their parents are both buried at Wood, and they talk about primarily their teenage years of what it was like to live in old Building 11, which was the fire engine house at the time before they moved in there. And they talk about some of their memories and soldiers walking back and forth on the side of their house. And they never used the back door only to take out the garbage because there was always, soldiers walking around. And people didn't know where they lived. Their friends were like, you live where? So they had a very sweet story to tell. And they, too, are very passionate about the Soldiers Home and what it represents and who it serves. And so they were very gracious and helping, and they wanted to help us tell this story. But, we also had to talk about the women founders because that's really important. And, of course, you have to talk to veterans because that's who this place impacts and serves. And we had to talk to historians, right, and preservationists. We spent about a year working on this project, and, the first thing you do is research, right? And I don't know how many documents we went through, and Scotty reading a number of books and going over to the UWM archives, and just to try to figure out and get a sense of, okay, what really needs to be covered in the time that we have. So, again, this is not a 10-part documentary, right? And so we had to be a little bit selective, but I think we covered the main points. So people who didn't know anything about the Soldiers Home, which is why we did this in the first place, because, we were tired of hearing people saying, well, what's that building? You go to the Brewer game. Hey, do you know what that is? It looks like a haunted house, but no. And then you tell them, and they're like, oh, really? And so I think this documentary is educational for those people who don't know anything about it. And also I think it's also very, it just hits the heart, I think, when those people who do know about it, they can kind of reflect and think back to maybe some of the stories that they heard, maybe from parents or great-grandparents. It just kind of solidifies the uniqueness and the importance of this place that we have in Milwaukee.
And you can't do a documentary about a historic Milwaukee institution without chatting with John Gerda, who is featured in this documentary. And right at the top of the doc, he says, the Milwaukee Soldiers Home, Old Main, is the most visible and least recognized building probably in the whole city of Milwaukee. And I think that's true. We don't know enough about this place. I mean, this is a building that is made with the very sort of marrow of who we are. It's a beautiful Gothic tower built with Cream City brick made from clay from the Menominee Valley. I mean, it's very much of us. And so we are honored and proud to share a little bit of its story.
And I also think people aren't going to realize until they watch the documentary that it's not just Old Main that represents Milwaukee Soldiers Home. There's a lot more to that campus, and they might be surprised.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Scotty, Marianne, thank you both so much for joining us here on Lake Effect and sharing your work.
Always happy to talk to you, Joy.
Thanks, Joy. I appreciate it.
Marianne Lazarski and Scotty Lee Myers are producers at Milwaukee PBS and the team behind the documentary A Hallowed Home for Heroes. We first spoke in 2023. You can watch the documentary online at milwaukeepbs.org. Earlier this year, Milwaukee Public Schools approved Annie Kubis as the new senior director of Milwaukee Recreation. Milwaukee Rec runs hundreds of programs in the city, from after-school care to youth sports and cooking classes. Throughout her career, Kubis has overseen various Milwaukee Rec programs, from Special Olympics to driver education and aquatics. She was most recently working part-time as Milwaukee Rec's Special Projects Coordinator. Lake Effect's Exgrit Nunez speaks with Kubis about her job experience and the goals she has for this role. She begins with how she got it.
I've worked for the department in some capacity since I was 16, and I'm very passionate about the work. And so the timing was really great for my family, and I decided to take a risk and apply and hopefully come back to join the team that I care about so much and the work that I'm so passionate about.
As a refresher for our listeners, what does your job entail as the leader of Milwaukee Rec? Like, what are some of your responsibilities?
Ultimately, leading the efforts of our department, we're very broad. We serve our community in a lot of capacities. And so helping with strategic planning, working in the area of efficiency, making sure that everyone has the tools that they need to be successful, but ultimately just sort of steering the ship, if you will, and making sure that our community is receiving the services that they want and need. So every day is a little bit different. Never quite know what each day will look like, which I love. So yeah, being in the community, engaging with our community members, our partners, and then engaging my team to make sure that the programming we're offering is exactly what our community wants.
How have things been going so far? How have you approached it?
Yeah, they're going really well. One of the things I missed the most when I was part-time with our department the last 7 years was just the constant access to what I call my people. And so it's been really great to be back with the folks that I've worked with for so many years. And I've been getting caught up to speed on the programs, where everything is, trying to get to know the elements that I may not necessarily know very well. I'm getting out to sites, meeting with our teams. So really listening to staff and stakeholders on how has it gone? What do you need? How can I be helpful? So I'm really in kind of a learning, listening phase right now, but ultimately wanting to position myself to be able to support everyone in the way that they need it and the way that makes the most sense for our department.
So I understand that Milwaukee Rec is something that you grew up with. Tell me how it's played a personal role in your life.
Yeah, I grew up here, graduated from Milwaukee Public Schools, so I spent time in sports camp and arts camp when I was growing up. My sisters and I were all involved in various rec classes. And then when I turned 16, I started working for a therapeutic recreation program in the summer called Club Rec and Camp Congress in the afternoons during the school year till the end of high school. So I had both the experience of participating in recreation, but then also working part-time. And then I started my full-time job with the department in 2005, managing the adaptive athletics and Special Olympics programs, and then worked full-time until 2018. And during that time, I also moved into a management role, coordinating and overseeing our citywide programs. And then my kids also participate now in various sports offerings and other classes, from tumbling teddy bears when my oldest son was 3 to now he's playing basketball with his school. So very much a part of our life, my life, and something that I really place a lot of value on.
Yeah, so it definitely seems like Milwaukee Rec has touched your life all throughout it. Is there like a particular recreation class or event that's resonated with you, or have you ever led a class before?
Oh gosh, I don't think I've led a class. I did help create a sensory series of classes. That's something that we've navigated a lot with my own children. And so worked with a team at Beulah Brinton to put together a series of classes to meet the sensory needs of children. And it was something that we needed. And I figured if we needed it, other parents and families probably did as well. So being able to kind of work on that with the team there and then see it come to fruition and then see all the participants and families feel like they were seen and heard and had what they needed really resonated with me. And that was something that I appreciated the opportunity to do that.
That's so amazing. Thank you for sharing that with me. I'm Lake Effect's ex-Gret Nunez speaking with Annie Kubis about her taking on the role of Senior Director at Milwaukee Rec. So, as you mentioned, you worked a variety of roles at Milwaukee Rec since you were a teenager, and you also started your career as an MPS special education teacher. How would you say your professional experience has prepared you for this role?
Sure. Honestly, it didn't even occur to me when I was working part-time as a high school student and in college that recreation was a field. And I, growing up, always wanted to be a teacher, specifically in the area of special ed. So I went to school and became a special ed teacher. And there was kind of a natural progression into the adaptive athletics and Special Olympics role because I was serving the same population. So that was kind of my introduction to the rec department. And then when I moved into the role of coordinator of our citywide programs, I had a lot of exposure to a variety of program areas. So, anything from aquatics, outdoor education, active older adults, Special Olympics, driver's ed. It really gave me an opportunity to familiarize myself with a lot of different program areas. And so I think that really helped set me up for success in this role because I have a pretty good handle on what our department does, how individual programs function, who we serve, potential connections within the community. Yeah, I think that role specifically really helped to set me up for success in this role.
And I'm wondering what's something you want to improve or address at Milwaukee Rec during your first year on the job, especially since you have a lot of these personal and professional experiences.
There's a lot of amazing work that's already happening. And so I think in the first year, it's really familiarizing myself with where we have maybe some gaps in service, where the things that we're doing really, really well, maybe we can expand on those. But really building partnerships and relationships with members of our community, whether, it's anchor organizations in specific neighborhoods or nonprofits, other folks that are doing similar work, because we are so much stronger when we collaborate instead of duplicating services. And so really getting out there and hearing from folks what it is that they need and want and being able to figure out ways to incorporate that into our programming and some of the things that we offer.
Yeah, that's great that you mentioned that because I was about to ask you, how will you make sure that you accomplish that goal and serve Milwaukeeans, especially since, of course, we're made up of many different communities and each neighborhood has its own values and needs. So, yeah, how, I guess, will you connect with these community members?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm pretty passionate about is providing a seat at the table, right? So instead of saying at this community center, we're going to offer X, Y, and Z, making sure that we are involving members of that community in the decision making so that we know that we're offering what people actually want to participate in. Same thing with engaging our teens in wondering what programming do you want to see in our late night programs at our twilight centers. So not assuming that we know, but actually engaging community members and other stakeholders in some of that decision making. And a lot of that is based on relationship building. So where I may not have connections or a previous established relationship, contacting some folks and setting up meetings and really trying to engage in an authentic way so that we truly are capturing the needs and desires of the community that we serve and many of us live. I think that's a huge piece of our puzzle.
So I know that Milwaukee Rec has been working on renovating its 52 playfields and building a new community center. But what's an ongoing or upcoming project you're excited to work on?
Yeah, those are both at the top of the list, truly. We're all excited for the 2027 opening of the Milwaukee Recreation Community Center on 76th and Silver Spring, our first standalone community center with a pool. We have Beulah Brinton in Bayview, but really excited for all the opportunities that this will provide. I think rather than a specific project, what I'm excited about is figuring out ways that we can continue to be nimble and flexible and adjust to meet the ongoing changing needs of our community and remaining community-centered, being collaborative in our approach, and then creating efficiency wherever we can.
Well, Annie, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you for having me. We just appreciate the support and look forward to connecting sometime soon.
Annie Kubis is Milwaukee Recreation's new senior director. She spoke with Lake Effect's Excret Nunez. You can hear more of their conversation at WUWM.com. Milwaukee Recreation is a financial supporter of WUWM. In about 15 minutes, we'll check in with the artist in residence at the Betty Brinn Children's Museum. But first, we'll head to the Rare Books Room at the library to learn about its full collection of Audubon prints. That's coming up on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. The Milwaukee Public Library has a complete collection of Audubon prints housed in Central Library's Rare Books Room. The collection showcases 435 life-size, hand-colored species of birds with incredible detail. They merged 19th century art and science and are considered foundational to American conservation. MPL's collection of Audubon prints is one of about 120 sets in the world today. To learn about it, Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski talks with Rare Books librarian Timothy Rush, who explains how the library came to get the complete set.
So our set has a really storied history. It was donated to the city of Milwaukee in 1945 by the Schlitz Brewing Company. They purchased a copy from the Ware Gallery of New York City. This collection had actually been sold off from Yale. Yale had an extra set, which is a wild thing to be able to say, that they actually had like 3 sets at one time of what is a item that only has like 120 some full sets in the world today. And that set was owned by old naturalist George Bird Grinnell. He was a conservationist, one of the founding members of the Audubon Society, and he donated it to his alma mater, Yale, and eventually Yale had too many, and so they then sold that off, and we, as Schlitz, ended up purchasing that for the city of Milwaukee. And the original idea behind the set was that it would be donated to the city, not specifically the library, but that it would be framed and sent out to all of the schools to encourage the young people of Milwaukee to become conservationists, to be inspired by nature and be encouraged to do things with it. And it did that for a very long time.
So you mentioned how rare it is to have a complete set. Can we break down the numbers? How many images are in a set, and when was it originally published?
Mm-hmm. So the Audubon's Birds of America is 435 different plates. While you typically see it nowadays in big bound volumes, how it was issued was in smaller sets of individual plates that were unbound. The set that we have is the original oversized format, which is known as the double elephant folio, which like the plates were 29.5 inches by 39.5 inches, which is massive, as you saw as we were going through it today. And there are 435 different plates with even more birds, because some of these plates do have multiple types of birds placed on them, and it is gorgeous. It took from 1827 until 1838 to finish issuing this because it was like a subscription service. Instead of Netflix, you got just birds sent to your home every so often. Obviously, for the affluent, this was not something for folks who were, working in the coal mines. But it is a gorgeous thing, and it is massive. It was a massive undertaking.
Yeah, so let's get into this undertaking and who led it. So we're mentioning Audubon. His full name was John James Audubon. Why was he so passionate about capturing birds in this way, and how did he execute this massive endeavor?
So Mr. Audubon is a interesting figure. He has this massive love of the natural world. He does not just cover birds in his work. We also happen to have a set of his quadrupeds of North America, which is also small mammals. But he endeavored to try and capture with a greater eye to scientific detail these wonders of nature. And so each of these prints actually reproduces these birds at life size and at the finest of details. He painted them, and then they were inscribed onto big engraved plates that would then be colored by a team of artisans in London. And it really was just a massive undertaking. He not only was producing these from dead specimens, because he takes this way to create scenes from the dead specimens so that you can see how they are supposed to be in nature, but they're sometimes a little off. But also by observing nature, he would go on expeditions to different parts of North America to witness these birds in the wild. So it was really a big undertaking that spans, over a decade of time and a massive amount of expenditure on his part.
So you talk about just the scale of it, the life size, the detail. I imagine this set the bar for ornithological illustration. So no doubt these prints are still beautiful to look at. How does the science hold up?
So that's the interesting thing. Audubon is continued to be held up as this pioneer of artistic rendering and a pioneer in this form of highly detailed naturalistic art. Some of his scientific work does not hold up as well over time. There are lots of instances where you run into birds that are probably misidentified or perhaps were just never existed in the way that he has shown them. One of the plates that we looked at today, the carbonated warbler, is one of his known mysteries. So as anything that has existed for now almost 200 years, people have studied these deeply, and there are these birds that he painted that you just go, but why don't we find that now? And while some of the birds obviously went extinct over time, the breadth of scientific analysis has gone, well, this doesn't seem to have ever existed like this. So what was he looking at? And the best part about that is it kind of gets into this weird Bigfoot situation where no one can actually say for sure what he was doing, but instead they are, doing their best to interpret, well, maybe he was doing this. And, so the veracity of all of his scientific work is not as upheld over time.
And I also want to kind of stem this as to not being as upheld is also him as a person, right? It's 200 plus years later, a lot of people, historical figures, many other subjects within the library itself. We learn more about people and course correct as we go on. So let's talk about Audubon as a person. And as you mentioned, people couldn't collect these without means. He was also with means and was a slaveholder, held white supremacist views. And for a long time, perhaps this aspect of Audubon was not an automatic discussion point, and it's mostly about the art always. And more people, I feel, are starting to learn about this aspect of him as a person, right?
Yeah, as time goes on, we have this sort of duty to reevaluate these figures that we uphold. One of the tricky situations, especially with folks like Audubon, is where you draw the line as to remembering and recognizing folks' roles as pioneers and as influential figures, and the line between that and memorializing them in an upheld, sort of deified sort of way. It is important to look at historical figures as people, and people are messy. And John James Audubon can be two things at once. He can be one of the most beautiful artisans of creating these images of birds, as well as a man who wrote about experiences with runaway slaves where he props himself up as the hero for having returned them to slavery, because he instead got them to be bought back by a kinder master than the one that had been abusing them, which is one of his own actual written accounts of his expeditions. So he is a complicated figure, and he is not unique amongst our collection. There are many people in the Rare Books collection that are remembered for their achievements, and it is important that we also remember the darker marks that they have on their personal lives and their legacies.
Well, and to contrast legacy and history of conservationists, I want to bring back up George Bird Grinnell, who you mentioned at the top of our conversation. Who was he, and how does he tie into this library's collection a little more directly here?
So it was really fun to find out the history behind George Bird Grinnell. It's just fun to talk about a man whose middle name is Bird in collaboration with the Audubons. But he was this very important figure. He actually attended school in John James Audubon's mansion in Assigning, New York, near his family home. And he would be one of the founding members of the Audubon Society, as I said earlier. He was the editor of Forest and Stream, and he would go on all of these naturalistic expeditions. And as part of that work, he ended up coming in contact with a lot of the Great Plains Native Americans. And it was those contacts that he had, both positive and negative, as you do, that led him to becoming a proponent, a ally, and worked to better the reasonable treaties with Native American tribes. He also was part of the effort to start national parks in the United States.
So with this long-lasting collection, Audubon societies are still all across America. Some are renamed, a lot are kind of reconfiguring their goals as institutions, but with the prints themselves, why do you think these illustrations have stood the test of time and remain such a valuable thing, both monetary and just culturally?
That's a really good question. The thing that strikes me is usually, I used to not really value it as part of our collection as much as other things. It is one of those things that we, of course, share with the world, that we have this, expensive, rare item, but it usually felt like something that wasn't specifically of Milwaukee to me. But now, having worked with it firsthand for several years now, you are always struck with how beautiful nature is and how these birds just seem lifelike on the page. The ability of Audubon to have created this imagery that truly evokes a sense of awe in you is remarkable. And he set the bar so high 200 years ago with how to render these imageries, which is not to say that no one has achieved greater since, but it is such a landmark that it is gorgeous to have and be able to share this. The original goal was sharing this beauty with the people of Milwaukee. I actually have a fun quote from Richard Krug, who is the man who his name is above the door of the Rare Books room here. When we received the Audubons in 1945, he said, "The set has great monetary value because of its rarity. It has great scientific value because of the accuracy and care with which the artist recorded the natural history he loved in a way which imparts the greatest amount of information. Its high artistic value is self-evident." And that's why it has stood the test of time, is that it is just a remarkable achievement that is self-evident when you view it.
Timothy Rush is the Rare Books librarian at the Milwaukee Public Central Library. He spoke with Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski. If you need some flexibility when you listen, you can listen to Lake Effect on demand. Find it as a podcast wherever you like to listen, to download and enjoy on the go. Still to come, we'll meet this year's artist in residence at the Betty Brinn Museum. That's next on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. Milwaukee native Malik Johnson is a Grammy-nominated cellist, composer, and music producer, and he recently added the title of Artist in Residence at Milwaukee's Betty Brinn Children's Museum. Johnson became the museum's first artist in residence last year and returns to the role this year to continue connecting with children and families through music. He speaks with Lake Effect's Excret Nunez about his work and the Betty Brinn Artist in Residence program.
Before we dive into your work as an artist in residence at Betty Brinn, I'd love to learn more about you and your artistry. How did you first discover the cello?
I would say actually the cello discovered me. So there is an after-school program here in Milwaukee called MISO, Milwaukee Youth Symphony Orchestra, and I was in third grade, and they came to our schools and were asking, teachers if they knew any students who might want to learn an instrument. So my mom and myself were interested. So we got there, and they had instruments available. They had the violin, viola, cello, and bass. I thought the bass they were offering was like the electric bass. But when I got there, it was an upright bass. I was like, what is this thing? Like, this was not what I expected. Turns out they ran out of upright basses, and they were like, we have the cello, so you can play the cello as the next best thing. So I was like, okay, cool. So I started playing the cello.
What a way to find it. You said the cello found you. What made you stick with it?
I would say a lot of things made me stick with the cello. One, I would say the cello is just the best sounding instrument. Like, violin is like kind of high and like the bass is really low, but the cello is like a good sweet spot. It's the most like a human voice. So like my cello teacher, for example, growing up, Ravenna Helson, she would play and she would use so much musicality in her playing. She would be really big and expressive. So that combined with the sweetness and the sound of the cello really made me fall in love with the instrument.
That's amazing. I love to hear that. So you're also a Grammy-nominated artist. I'm wondering, what's the story behind that?
Yeah, for sure. So when I went to college, I went to DePaul University in Chicago. I met this arranger named Matt Jones, and he would arrange strings for artists if they wanted strings on their album. He has an orchestra, and the orchestra will record those strings and then send it to the artist to put on their album. So 2 of my Grammy nominations have come through that way, which is Kirk Franklin, Long Live Love. That album we did about 4 or 5 songs, recorded strings for. And then also with that orchestra was the John Legend Christmas album. And the one I'm super proud of, which is a song that I produced with one of my good friends, Bailey Goldberg, for an artist named Masego. On his album Studying Abroad Extended Stay, I produced a song called Well Traveled, and that received a Grammy nomination in 2021, his album.
Wow.
So yeah, that was really cool.
That's amazing. We have like all this talent here in Milwaukee.
Yeah, we definitely do, for sure. I love Milwaukee.
I know there are some other artists you've performed with over the years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I appeared on NPR's Tiny Desk series in 2018 with PJ Morton. It's still on YouTube. I tend to go back every now and then just to be like, oh my gosh, pinch myself. Yes, I've performed the great Stevie Wonder 2024. We got to play on a couple stops of his tour. Milwaukee and Chicago, I played with him. And there's so many others I'm just blanking right now. But yeah, it's been a great journey.
I want to touch on how you were previously the Betty Brinn Artist in Residence in 2025, and you've returned this year. I was wondering if you could tell me about this program. Like, when I learned about this, my first thought was, what do you do as an artist in residence at a children's museum?
Right. So there's a few components to my residency at Betty Brinn. So the first one is I give weekly performances where I'm just playing my cello, jamming out with the kids. It's really fun. Like, we have a lot of kids dancing, and newborns and toddlers are crawling around, trying to get close to my cello. It's a good time. The second part is that I give toddler talk back. So this is like 30-minute sessions, of course, that I'm giving to promote social emotional learning with the kids. And some things we kind of discuss are exploring your goals and dreaming big. This year is a little different than last year. So last year, to end the residency, I created the Betty Brinn's official theme song. But this year, we're actually going to start bringing music to the families. So we're going to actually be using household items to create instruments. So We're going to be doing like pan flutes, and we're going to make rain sticks that the kids can, create at the museum and take home, and hopefully have a musical time with their families. So yeah.
Can you talk about how kids interact with you when you play music, or how you've noticed them respond to the music?
Yeah. So at Betty Brinn, we get kids of all ages, like 0 to, elementary kind of ages. So there's been so many instances where there's been just like a baby just locked in, just staring at me like a super fan, essentially. And even the toddlers, they like to dance, and we have scarves for the kids to, wave around when they're dancing. But it's such a cool experience. A lot of parents and grandparents tell me, like, this was the first time my child or grandchild has ever been to a musical performance or seen a cello. So that's one of, like, the coolest things that I think that we provide. So, yeah, it's been great.
What made you want to apply to a program like this and be their artist in residence?
Me personally, Betty Brinn was a staple in my childhood. I used to go to Betty Brinn as a kid. So when this opportunity presented itself, I knew like this was like meant to be, because this was a place where I felt, seen, and a place where I felt like I can explore my dreams and become who I wanted to be. So I kind of want to do that same thing and provide those same experiences for our guests.
I'm Lake Effect's Excret Nunez, speaking with Malik Johnson about his artist in residency at the Betty Brinn Children's Museum. So, in addition to being a cellist and a composer, you're also a music producer known as 99 the Producer. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that.
For sure. So I started making beats when I was in 5th grade. My parents got me a MacBook, and I would just spend all day on GarageBand trying to make beats. And I would also play the cello. So I knew that I wanted to kind of combine those worlds, where I kind of grew up on R&B and gospel and rap music with my classical training. I wanted to somehow combine that. So I did that through my own production. And I started 99 the Producer in high school. I released my first song. So I love to songwrite. I like to just, sing melodies. I'm not the best singer, but, I try to sing through my cello. But I like to songwrite and, just make music and make good vibes. So, yeah.
And you recently blended all of your skills to produce a theme song for Betty Brinn. And I would love it if we could listen to the song together.
Yeah.
This is Ready to Go to Betty Brinn by 99 the Producer.
When you close your eyes, do you see your imagination? If you reach for the sky, you could land on a star. You could be what you wanna be, dream what you wanna dream. Yeah. You can dance when you wanna dance, sing when you wanna sing. So let me hear you say,
Something that stood out to me from the song were the sounds of kids having fun. I was wondering if you could tell me how that project came about.
Yeah, for sure. So in those toddler talkback, those 30-minute sessions we have, sometimes I would bring my recording equipment, and we would have instruments for the kids to use. So we would have shakers and percussive instruments. And I would also ask them to use their voices to record so I can eventually add it to the tracks. So that was one of the days where I had my microphone. I was like, you know what, let's all just say, woo, on three, 1, 2, 3, woo. So I definitely had to add that into the track. It was fun.
And what are some other sounds that inspired this song? Like, I don't know, I'm hearing when you say like star, I could hear the star,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, there's some sparkles in there that I definitely added. But a lot of the stuff is actually just really embedded in the track. So I have a few claps of the kids that they did, and under the main whistle part, there's a little synth that the kids sang, and I kind of pitched it and stuff. So that's what I kind of did. I took some sound bites from each session that we did from the Toddler Talkback and kind of put it all together in a song.
Yeah, I also really enjoy how that it's fun and for like kids to sing along with, you know, like it's catchy.
Yep.
Thanks for sharing it with me.
Absolutely.
Well, before we wrap up, I was wondering if you might have any advice for any up-and-coming musicians or artists.
For sure. I would say the biggest thing that I try to remind myself every day is that it's about the journey and not the destination. That's what I try to tell myself, like, oh, I feel like I should be at this point, or I feel like I should have this amount of dollars. Like, it's really just about the people who I'm affecting and the people who you will inspire. So that's what I try to kind of focus on, is how much impact I'm creating. I would recommend others to do the same, and just remember that it's about the journey and not where you end up, you know.
Absolutely. Well, Malik, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It was really fun to learn more about you and your music.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Malik Johnson is a cellist, composer, and music producer from Milwaukee. He's also this year's artist in residence at Betty Brinn Children's Museum. He spoke with Lake Effect's Excret Nunez. And that wraps up today's show. Thank you so much for being here with us. I'm Joy Powers. If you missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at wuwm.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Tomorrow on Lake Effect, a local small business owner shares how the economic uncertainty of the current political climate is impacting her work. Thanks so much for joining us right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.